Chapter 69. There's a fire inside of you. I know for sure that's true. Are you a campfire I can rest by, or a raging fire in which I'll die? She woke up in the middle of the night without knowing what had woken her. Something was wrong. After lying quietly for a while and just looking straight into the dark, she heard something. Motorcycles. Motorcycles were on their way to the barracks where they were lying. She spun around to lie on her stomach, lifting herself up on her elbows. She looked toward Diego's bed. It was empty. Suddenly she turned cold. He had left, and motorcycles were on the way to the barracks. She was completely unprotected, in the middle of nowhere without a cell phone. The only one who knew she was here was Diego, a man she barely knew. What if he was a member of Hell's Angels or Bandidos? What if they were on their way here now? Every part of her body trembled. The motorcycle stopped outside and she heard voices. Carefully she got up and peeked out the window. In the yard she saw two motorcycles. One had just parked and two people got off it. The second motorcycle was still running, and the person who had parked the first motorcycle went and got on the second motorcycle behind the driver. The driver turned the motorcycle on a dime, and even though Jenny could not see who was driving, she understood that it was Diego. He left with someone on the back of his motorcycle while leaving a man just outside the barracks. What on earth was he doing? Had he brought friends from a motorcycle gang here so that they could have fun with a girl he had picked up by the side of the road a couple of days ago? If she had had her cell phone, she would have dialed 112 immediately. She had never been this scared before. Oh yes, of course she had, the night of the assault. That time it had all gone so fast. She had not had time to be scared before it was too late. When she had reacted, Keva was already bleeding on the cold floor in Nordstad. The thought of that got her going. This time she would be prepared. She looked around for something to defend herself with. There were tools all over the floor. A large wrench would do. She didn't make it to the wrench. The door banged open and a huge, ruddy giant came in, filling the entire doorway. When he saw Jenny, his small eyes widened. Then he smiled and said something she didn't understand. Mädchen? She didn't know German. He mentioned Diego's name and walked toward her with his arms wide. She felt naked as she stood in the t-shirt she had borrowed from Diego. It only reached a bit down her thighs and she was not wearing panties. They hung with the rest of her washed clothes on the chair at the table. She could barely move without exposing herself, and she felt invaded and vulnerable. The noisy giant came closer and closer with his toothless grin, still speaking German. He put his big freckled hand on her arm. Without thinking, she jerked her arm away, took a step back and said, "Leave me alone!" It surprised her that her voice sounded confident. The giant looked annoyed, said something else she didn't understand, and took a step toward her. Her back was against the wall. The door opened again. In less than a second, Diego was between Jenny and the German. Although the giant had to weigh significantly more than 100 kilos, Diego lifted him up with a firm grip on the shirt collar and pushed him out of the door. He spoke in a sharp voice to the older man, and although she didn't understand everything that was said, it was clear that he was telling him to stay out. Did he scare you? I told him not to go in. I guess he got tired of waiting outside. Diego watched her closely. She leaned against the wall behind her and slowly slid down to the floor. He sat down next to her and put a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, Jay, he'll not come in here again. You can lock the door if you want. He dug up a key from his pocket and gave it to her. We have some more motorcycles to pick up. It'll take half an hour or so. Dieter will have to wait outside. Let me in when I come back, okay? With a pale face, she nodded. Don't worry, I won't let anyone in again. You don't have to worry, Jay. Okay, she whispered, rising slowly. Okay, she repeated with a steadier voice when she saw him still lingering at the door. When she had locked the door behind him, she sat down on his bed. There she could look out without being seen. Slowly the heat returned to her cold body. Diego and the other motorcyclist rode back and forth with the motorcycles they apparently picked up where the forest road turned into a gravel road. The red giant who had frightened her sat on one of the motorcycles and smoked cigarette after cigarette while he waited for the other two. At least 15 new motorcycles had been parked in Diego's giant carport. Gradually, she began feeling better and she started wondering what was happening out there. The motorcycles had most likely been driven there in a truck. It was probably the truck driver who had come to her. That explained why he didn't participate in driving the motorcycles. Maybe he didn't know how to drive a bike. Why were they bringing all these motorcycles here? If they had looked old and in need of repair, she would have understood it. Then Diego would have been able to fix them. But they all looked like new, well-functioning motorcycles. She was even more puzzled when the red-haired giant gave Diego a large bundle of banknotes that Diego folded and tucked in the inside pocket of his leather suit. Then they shook each other's hands, and the giant and the other guy walked back towards the gravel road. The truck was probably standing there. Why did he get both motorcycles and money? When Diego was on his way back to the barracks, she got up, wrapped in a blanket from his bed, and went to the door to unlock it. He got in, looked at her quickly again as if checking she was okay, and then took off his leather suit. Then he sat down at the table, stretched out his legs and arms, and sighed slightly. "Are you going to repair the motorcycles?" She sat down across from him. He looked at her for a moment with a look she didn't understand. Then he shook his head. "The less you know, the better." When she finally fell asleep again, it was with sadness in her heart. She understood that her grace period was over. This was no longer a place where she could hide. It was time for her to go home.